current just like AI-based tool set is all about curiosity. It's about learning something new every day because it's evolving so fast that you just need to keep up to keep being effective. And which generations are easily to adapt?
Oh, that's a tough question. I'm going to split it up a little bit because I
Sure.
think, look, there are not, this is going to sound like a sweeping generalization, but obviously younger generations are more digitally inclined, digital natives. They've grown up in their life always having one of these. So, from a technology perspective, I think right now younger generations pick it up and use it and adapt to it differently. But from a curiosity perspective, which I think is different,
Okay.
I would say that any generation is curious.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Reframe First. I'm Alexei, host of the podcast. Let me welcome our today's guest, Pat Cormier, founder of Fintarsia Solutions. So, hi Pat, it's great having you here.
Hi, Alexei. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining. So, could you tell us about Intarsia Solutions altogether and what you're doing there, what you're building, what you're trying to achieve, what your mission is? So, please.
Sure, absolutely. I started about 5 years ago my own practice of executive coaching and management consulting. Primarily, I work in the space of change and transformation. I work with leaders of organizations, any size, any industry for that matter, global. And I work with them as they navigate change. I've spent my last 15 years working with change leaders and started professionally with Cotter International, which is a consulting firm that was started by John Cotter, who was a thought leader in leadership and change and started a consulting practice about 15, 16 years ago now, really working with organizations to lead differently as they go through change and market shifts and everything else. That's what I've been doing for the last 15 plus years.
That's a lot of working with leaders.
Yeah, leaders and teams and everywhere in between.
And what are the typical questions that leaders come to you?
How to move faster.
Yeah.
How to move faster, how to help my employees embrace change and new vision to move faster. Usually it's about moving faster.
I have the same request, now that I hear we need to embrace change and we need to start moving faster, and I have no clue how to achieve that. What's the typical approach? How do you do it?
And so you're asking what the secret sauce is for that, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first thing is a lot of leaders within the business space, and I work with business, government, nonprofit as well, and a lot of folks sort of look at dealing with people as the soft skills. And I actually believe they're the hardest skills of all, and they're the most important. And so, when you approached me to have this conversation about reframing, I was intrigued by the word that you used, because I actually think the ability to reframe in this world today is the new superpower, because that's how you help people within organizations that are dealing with significant pace of change, significant uncertainty, not knowing what the future is going to hold. We have geopolitical issues, right? And so how we help them deal with the fear, the anxiety, and all of those things to be able to move through it, even if you're not necessarily fully embracing it, but at least move through it, is important. And I think we have, over time, through technology and automation and other things, we've kind of put people at the back burner for a while now. We've been focusing on systems. We've been focusing on we've been always about productivity and technology and how do we increase our productivity, and a little bit to the detriment of how do we help people, the individuals, the humans, actually handle that.
Yeah. when I came up with this idea of reframing, it was first of all reframing the business models, because like all business models are not functional anymore. And since you mentioned the world is changing, it's changing indeed. All these geopolitical uncertainties, and then like
Yeah.
age of AI, and then like
Yeah.
newer generation of people, and like a lot of everything. Like money is expensive. All of that together brought to the fact that like the previous frame is not functional.
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, I think the business models, one of the things that I learned with Cotter in the work that I did with them leading into the work that I'm doing now is, there really is a science to change and helping people navigate it. The first one is from a business model perspective. What I'll say is, even from a business structure perspective, it's no longer working. If you think about the traditional ways in which businesses are structured, it's very hierarchical, it's very top down, at least has been traditionally. And if you think of the speed in which communication now travels, and just that structure of how long it would take from the CEO all the way down to the frontline staff and back again, how long that communication would take to be able to act on it in today's pace and change, it's too slow. It's too cumbersome. So how do we work more collaboratively? How do we break down the silos? How do we make it more, or not more, but and networked at the same time as providing those efficiencies and structure and processes of the hierarchy? So that's one thing from a business model perspective. The other thing that I would say that's no longer working is our viewpoint on leadership is no
Okay.
longer working. It used to be within that hierarchy, the way that it worked was the higher you went up, the more information you got. You hoarded that information because that information was power. That power then allowed you to continue to move up. And we have to really, I think, reframe the way we look at leadership to be more grassroots, more collaborative, more empowering, less control, more trust, so that we can move faster. Because the more that we control things, it just impedes speed.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds very like fortune something kind of approach, because yeah, all this like information silos and all this stuff is like, it sounds like huge organizations, but it still affects like all size organizations of all sizes, because
Absolutely. It affects all sizes.
yeah,
It's just the degree, the scape,
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
scope and scale and degree.
Yeah, like in modern age of like AI tools, you're so much becoming so much capable, and capable horizontally, because like in the end, about like previously you were supposed to dive deeper into certain field to be specialists there. Now you can like extend your horizons, and you're capable of much more. And then the question of leadership comes into play. Like, why do we need the leader? Why do we need the manager? Like everything changes. So that's one of the goals, to understand like what the new rules of the game are, because we don't
Yeah.
really understand it yet.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned the manager and why do you need the manager? In traditional, in the past, that middle manager was sort of the linchpin that allowed organizations to grow, right? Because the senior most person or the founder or whomever could not possibly, make decisions and manage everything. So eventually that middle manager role was created. Well, to your point now, is AI threatening that middle manager? And what I would challenge is, at least in the near term, in the immediate future, we need leaders and leadership from a behavioral perspective across the organization, up and down and throughout, right? And what we've done, this is my feeling, is what we've done over the last several decades is we've somewhat stunted the ability and the capability of our people within organizations to be able to lead, because we focused on management so much. And so there's a whole uh, a whole that have simply just been told what to do. They've stopped trying to come up with ideas because they get shot down. They've stopped thinking creatively or holistically about the organization because they haven't been encouraged to do that. And so they're just waiting to be told what to do. The challenge is you need people who can think innovatively, think creatively. We don't want to continue to underdevelop that side of it, not only with our structure and current leadership styles, but we also don't want to do that with AI. I mean, AI could literally stunt people even further by their reliance on it in terms of how they think creatively and innovatively and bigger picture. And those are all leadership behaviors that we need to cultivate in everyone in all of our organizations, not just positional leadership.
Yeah, I agree with you. Maybe like next one would be these companies. From which industries did you work the most, and how do like current trends affect them? Because you definitely saw something, and trends being the new generation, Gen Z, coming into play. They are behaving, they're expecting different approaches. Then the same AI, how the companies adapt to that. And I don't know, like all these geopolitical uncertainties, job insecurities, like how do all of this, like what do you see the most that the businesses are affected by? And how, and like in which industry? So just let's start from that and like dive deeper some.
Yeah, sure. In terms of the industries that I've worked in, I have quite a bit of experience, excuse me, within healthcare, whether it's pharma or manufacturing within healthcare providers. On the provider side, it's primarily U.S. based, but in the pharmaceutical and manufacturing, it's on a global perspective. I've worked with nonprofits, like I've said. I've worked within government spaces. So industry, what I would say is the work that I do from a leadership perspective and a change perspective, it's somewhat industry agnostic, right? Everybody's experiencing it. So from that perspective, I've worked in a broad sense. What I will say in terms of what they're facing now from a generational perspective, right about now, you could actually, because people are living longer, you could work for an organization that has 4 to 5 different generations. You could be a Gen X leading a boomer or having boomers report to you or vice versa, right? And Gen Z on coming in and everything else. So, how you lead and how you manage is challenging because each of those generations have different ways of communicating and preferences in ways of communicating. They have different ideals and beliefs about privacy. They have different thoughts around ways in which they should approach work and what you leave at the door when you come into the office, right? Different ideals about that. They have different desires around purpose and purpose-driven work. And so all of that leads to complexity not only when you're just trying to get a product out the door, but more importantly, when you're trying to get a product out the door and deal with something as massive as AI, it becomes challenging. Even the words you use, the way that you communicate, the media that you use, which is one of the reasons why when I work with organizations, I tell them that how you communicate becomes really, really important. And using different vehicles, methods, media, there's nothing, what I would say, there's nothing stronger than peer-to-peer communication. So the more you can involve others in the organization, again, as leaders of the organization, to help communicate the vision, what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, why will you be better off for it? That messaging becomes critical to helping people accept it and embrace it and help you.
Which generations do you think like are more easy to, not easy to, but when we talk about curiosity on one hand and script on the other hand, one wants like, because like a lot of businesses like about working through the script. So you have like your role description and you like step by step execute what's expected from you. Current just like AI based tool set is all about curiosity. It's about learning something new every day because it's evolving so fast that you just need to keep up to keep being effective. And which generations are easily to adapt.
Oh, that's a tough question. I'm going to split it up a little bit because I
Sure.
think, look, there are not, this is going to sound like a sweeping generalization, but obviously younger generations are more digitally inclined, digital natives. They've grown up in their life always having one of these. Um, so, you know, from a technology perspective, I think right now younger generations pick it up and use it and adapt to it differently. But from a curiosity perspective, which I think is different,
Okay.
I would say that any generation is curious. I think I would put that more on an individual level. I do think that the curiosity may be different, right? And it's different by the person, perhaps not generationally, right? So someone might be inclined to be really curious about the human aspect of technology and what is driving the human behavior and whatnot. And then someone else may be entirely curious about the technology and how to make the technology better, faster, whatever. I think curiosity is in all of us. And I believe even as we age, I would like to believe, as I'm aging, I believe this to be true for me, is that I'm as curious as I was when I was younger. I'm now approaching that curiosity with a different wisdom than I did when I was younger.
Yeah, I see that like the reason why I asked is like because this current pace, it's not only about curiosity, it's about that push to get to the end, to get to know it. Because like some people are quite easy to give up and when they do not achieve like this immediate result, this fast result, they are quite easy to give up. So some people are about to push further. I thought maybe there is some generational differences, but from what I hear, it's quite likely not.
Well, I think, and I also think too that before making sort of that generalization, I think also what we don't often do is create an environment where people can move faster, right?
Hmm.
So you were talking about, I noticed on your website and talking about leaving corporate, you mentioned bureaucracy,
Hmm.
right? And bureaucracy gets in our way all the time too, in terms of moving fast. So does lack of focus and clarity, right? So if I don't know what the priorities are for the organization and what the vision is, I'm going to move slower than someone else, right? And so there's a lot of variables that go into how quickly we move, and the term that I'll use from my days with Cotter and still the work that I do with Cotter, because I'm an affiliate with them still, is how do we create a sense of urgency for the people in our organization on what's important for our organization. And in order to do that, we have to help them have clarity around what it is we're trying to do and why, and why it's important. And also for the individual, why should I care? And I don't think we spend enough time doing that to help people. And by the way, here's where it gets tricky. What I would say to that last piece of why should I care, that's where is where the multiple generations is going to have a significant impact, because why a boomer should care is vastly different than why a Gen Zer should care, right? Because they're different places in their lives.
Yeah.
So we have to find a way in which we can communicate the benefits to all the stakeholders of multiple generations, not just one over the other.
Yeah, I understand. And that's a good point that you raised, because yeah, like yeah, we remove the bureaucracy in the company. We do not have it. But still, like people are burning out with this current pace and we cannot give them the answer why. Our clients demand the change. We ask for the change, but people are still like resistant to the change.
Yeah. And burnout, you mentioned burnout too, and I do think that that's it's a very um, real thing. And, oftentimes when I work with organizations, and I do a lot of leadership development courses as well with people from a variety of different organizations, and I will ask them, and they can be anywhere from a senior leader to sort of middle manager level often, and I will ask them, how many of you go to the same people all the time because you know they will get stuff done? And almost always everybody raises their hand.
Yeah.
And then the next question is, okay, so let's say that's 3 or 4 people on your team that you always go to. And then the next question is, how many people do you have on your team? And it's usually obviously more. It's usually double, whatever. Right? And the point is twofold. One, then you have reduced your capacity by that number.
Hmm.
Right? Yet most people, I haven't worked with anyone yet that has ever said, "I have plenty of resources. I'm okay with that. It's not a," right? And yet you are reducing your capacity by always going to those 4 people. And then the other point is, well, you're training the other people on your staff that they don't have to do anything because those other 4 people are going to do it. And so how do we start to really, again, coming back to how we lead and work with our people, how do you develop those people so that they are wanting to help, we are distributing the work effectively, we are looking at developmental ways to encourage people to share the work, right? Because that's partly why people are burning out. You've got those people that you're always tapping. So does the next person and the person next to them. And guess what? Those 20 projects you're working on that are important to the organization are being worked on all by the same people
Hmm.
across all the different functions. And then we scratch our head wondering why they're burning out.
Yeah, people are quite often burning out because of the pace, because like they cannot keep up. Yeah. Yeah, sure. With regards like coming back to the market trends, so like we touched on some AI generations and AI stuff. Like, what else do you see happening right now in corporate world, in the world? What's touching the businesses the most?
Well, I will say in the healthcare space, AI is a big one in
Sure.
terms of how to utilize it, how to help people want to use it. It is right now I'm seeing people sort of use it as a task-based tool if we're talking broadly across organizations. In the health space, obviously, they're using it from a science perspective, which is really exciting. And I think from a research point of view and in other, whether it's radiology or other areas, it really is. They're looking at the vast opportunities of what it can help from a diagnosis and a cure perspective, which is really, really exciting. From a broad across all function kind of perspective, it's still really task oriented and people are afraid of it for the most part. A lot of people, some people are excited by it, some people are afraid of it. I'm also seeing, I think AI is going to be really interesting from a supply chain perspective, I was just reading an article about an air craft company using it for uh, luggage and routing luggage and at an airport, you know prioritizing what bags needed to get put on different planes sooner and because of delays and whatnot, and it cut down their lost luggage by 30%. Right.
Yeah.
So things like that are going to continue. Proof points like that, I think, are going to be really, really valuable to show what it is possible of, and how we bring people along is going to be really important in that regard. People are afraid of losing their jobs. Another article that I read was there was a gentleman, and this is, to me, this is why leadership is going to matter for the next generation. I just read an article about a CEO who owns and the founder of the company, I believe. He fired 80% of his staff because he did not think that they would be able to adapt to accommodate for AI fast enough. And so he fired 80% of his staff to rehire for people who had the skills and the adaptability and curiosity that you were just talking about, right? He thought it was better, faster, and easier to rehire for that than to try to work with the people within his organization to be able to adapt and embrace it. To me, yes, it's one way to go, but to me, I look at that as a failure of leadership and a detriment to society.
Yeah.
I like to believe it doesn't have to be that way. And so that's
How,
what
how
we're up
do
against.
how do we lead the people through the change? Like, because I have also similar examples. Not about firing people. And you mentioned that diagnosis. Like if a friend of mine is selling some equipment with already some AI tools that are helping to do the diagnosis, he's coming to a clinic to like sell this equipment or install that equipment because it's already sold. He's trying to train them, and they're like, "Nah, we are not using that." And that's
Yeah.
that just sounds like job insecurity because they're afraid that they will be replaced by that equipment. But still, there is like people are not ready to accept that. And AI and all these tools are here to stay, so they're not going anywhere. They're becoming even more powerful every day. I have the same issue in our company because some people do embrace the change, as you mentioned, and but others are like on the opposite end, and they're like, "Man, it's AI. It cannot write good code, or whatever." So and like how do we lead the people through that phase, through that period? How do we make them embrace that change? Like
Yeah.
it's not AI that will replace human. It's human with AI that will replace another human.
Well, and that's a great point and a great way of looking at it, right? And that, by the way, that was a quick example of reframing right there to help
Mm.
people understand that, right? Like if you, it is here to stay in some form or configuration. So how do you help them see that? There's something called Rogers' Law of Diffusion, right? For technology and technology adoption. It's been around for forever. And you talk about innovators and laggards, right? And they amount to about the same amount of people percentage wise. And so there's always going to be folks that are late adopters and laggards that are going to, take a while to get on board. We tend to focus our attention on them and they tend to demand our attention. When you're trying to shift an organizational culture or even a broad culture, the best approach is to focus on the people that are innovating and adopting it and trying to go up that curve to get the early adopters, the early majority, to help start to create critical momentum. So how we talk about it and the way in which we can talk about it, just like what I was doing here, showing the benefits, the tangible benefits, the proof points, because that's what people are looking for. They're looking to understand why, and they're looking to see proof that and show me how this is going to work and how I'm going to be better off for it. Right. So using the example of the airline and lost luggage, I can communicate to just about anyone who's ever lost their luggage to say 30% reduction in lost luggage just because of AI. Isn't that fantastic? And there was a tool that was given to a baggage handler. So to your point, it's people utilizing AI that are going to be putting somebody who's not going to adapt and use AI out of a job. Right. And so the more we show those small, tangible, relatable examples will help people understand why there's benefit to this. And we have to do more of that. And it's because it's new, we have to keep doing that over and over again. How long have you been working with AI?
Since 22.
Okay, so since 22, you've been working with it for about 4 years. There are people who have never touched it. They just know the term. And so while we're comfortable with it, we have to get those folks that are further away from it comfortable too. So this is going to it's going to have its own arc, and the question is how deep can we make that curve to adoption?
Yeah, exactly. So that was my follow-up question because that sounds like a cultural change, and cultural change in
Yeah.
a company usually takes year like 12, 18, 24 months or so, from year to 2 years. That's the pace of cultural change if everything is fine. But right now everything is not fine. First, and second, I am not sure we have that year or 2 years time. We need to like move faster. We need to adapt faster because like us as a business can be out of market because market is changing too fast. That's the reason like probably of this podcast, the reframe. I try to understand how to reframe the business, but also like we need to like bring people up to speed because with new tools, with new approaches, if we do not adapt, we might be out of business.
Yeah.
As simple.
Yeah. What I would say is length of time for culture change really depends on, and I say this a lot with clients, so they're probably sick of me of hearing it, is how you go about doing it matters, right? So oftentimes we spend more time on the execution of it as opposed to more time on the people aspect of it. And what I will say is if you spend more time on the people aspect of it, the execution actually goes faster. So, for example, how many people are in your organization or the companies you work with? How many employees do you have?
Oh, like 50 to 60 employees.
Okay. So I've worked with organizations that have had 18,000 employees in the area that I've worked in, right? They were going about a significant cultural change. When we started working with them, they had just laid off half their organization. Um, and they needed to really recover from that, and they were making a significant shift. This was an auto auction company. They were making a significant shift to automation and digital and online auctions as opposed to in-person auctions. So, you know, I would say within 6 months, we were able to build urgency. And what I mean by urgency is at least it's aligned in what the organization is trying to do. People are bought into it, whatever. Within about 6 months of these 18,000 people, is that me? Does that mean that everything has gone from 0 to 60? We're now good. Don't worry about it in 6 months. No, but it means that a meaningful shift has taken place within the cultural mindset of what's possible. And they started working differently. They focused on one particular area that was meant to drive revenue, drove revenue significantly, right? So it's a combination of not just aligning the employees, but it's also from a leadership perspective, aiming those employees on what is going to drive the needle. Right? Because if they aren't aimed at what's going to drive the needle and kind of shown how this makes us better off, then they're just going to wake up in the morning and keep doing what they've always been doing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's about some shared goal and motivation to
Yeah.
get there.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I hear you. Awesome. Like what are your bets about the future? Where is it going? Where are we going to be in like year time, 2 years
In
of
a
time?
year's time, 2 years time. Oof.
2 years is too far probably. It's moving so fast nowadays.
Wow. That's such a question. Such a question. I'm not a good prognosticator. I guess what I'll tell you is where I hope we are is I hope that we have more leadership, behavioral leadership in the world, that people, whether it's within countries, within organizations, within communities, feel empowered to recognize they have more power and ability than what they probably believe they have right now. I hope that the business world recognizes that they have a responsibility beyond just shareholders. That
Do
is
you
what?
believe that?
Not in a year's time, I don't. But I do believe that that's, some of that is driving what we're facing today, right? Like people have to have a reason to believe. And if they don't, then what's the point?
I believe that corporate world thinks about like profits only, about revenues only, and not about how to drive change.
Well, yeah, and that's and to be quite frank, that's one of the problems that we face today. When John Cotter first started his research and his work, It was years ago studying General Electric and other major corporations that were facing significant change. And his research showed that 70 to 75% of the change efforts that corporations were taking on failed. They failed to reach their expectations and failed to reach the goals that they set out for. And of the 25%, 30% that were successful, a number of them were moderately, like they didn't reach everything. Only 5% roughly were fully successful. Now, think about the pace of change back then. This was 35, 40 years ago. Pace of change back then. Think about the change efforts, the technology that was driving it. You'd probably change it once every 10 years, right?
Yeah.
McKinsey did a research similar, now probably about 10 years ago. That number hadn't changed. So that tells us, those two data points tell us that we aren't getting any better at this. And yet change is happening more and more, and we're not getting any better at it. And the reason why we're not getting any better at it is because of what you just said. We're focusing more on the profits, more and more, less and less on the people, less and less on our employees. The talk about generations. The younger generations have learned from the mistakes of the boomer generations where they stayed with companies, and yeah, they might have been employed for 40 years for one company for their entire life. Next generation came and that promise went away. Now they were getting laid off and whatever. So the younger generations are like, I'm not making that mistake. I'm not going to do that. So what's their reason to believe, and what is their belief in their future? And as leaders, if we don't start to think about that as our employees, because that's what our employees are thinking about, that's what they care about. And if we aren't starting as leaders to start to think about that, that number is not going to get any better. And that's what I worry about for the next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it won't change.
Well,
That's my strong belief.
I don't like to believe that, because change is inevitable. So something is going to change. Something is going to change. And I prefer to think that we are, as humans, hopefully smart enough to change, and we have to do it one human at a time. And that's the interesting thing about cultures is everybody looks around and says, if we're in a company and we don't like the culture, everybody looks around and says, yeah, it won't change here. That's just our culture. Well, as long as you believe that, it won't change. And so we have to own how do we show up differently, and how do we change it? You started your own company. Hopefully you're running your company differently than the companies that you came from.
Maybe I'm better, maybe I'm worse. I don't know.
Well, you're doing this, so I like to think that you're doing it better. So I still have to believe that we can do better.
Awesome. Well, that was an interesting discussion. Is there anything you would like to add up on top of that?
No, I just wish you well. I wish your colleagues well. Anyone who, and I said this to you when you first approached me, anyone who has part of their brand had enough, corporations eating the fun and taking the fun and effectiveness out of things, and no bullshit as part of their brand, you're doing things differently, and you're being transparent, and you're being honest. And I think that's what people need to have a reason to believe.
Yeah. Thanks, Pam.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Sure.
Well, thanks a lot for your time. Thanks for joining.
All right. Stay in touch, please.
And wish you good luck in changing the corporate environment, in changing the leadership approach. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.